So this is Luke chapter 8, the scripture for April 23rd. As a brief aside, if you've been wondering why Luke's chapters feel so long, it's because they are. So far, I think we've averaged over 50 verses a chapter at this point in the book of Luke. And particularly when compared with some of Paul's letters, these chapters go on for a while. So kudos to y'all for continuing to keep up the reading. So in Luke chapter 8, the women that accompanied and provided for Jesus, this is one of those details that you may be tempted to gloss over. Don't. These women had resources, which was exceptional in this time. Women were considered property, and property doesn't own property, not usually. Particularly when these women are contrasted with Jesus' mother and brothers later on in the chapter who seem not to be providing for Jesus, it makes it all the more striking that these women, many of whom were either foreigners or who were sort of the ne'er-do-wells or the have-nots of society, these are the ones who are sponsoring Jesus' ministry, and his mother and his brothers are trying to drag him back home. I think that we can see clearly the implication of what Jesus said to the sinful woman in the last chapter at the home of Simon the Pharisee. The one who has been forgiven little loves little. These women, these religious outsiders, were the ones that Jesus welcomed and who hadn't been welcomed by the religious establishment up until this point. So here we encounter the first real parable in the Gospel of Luke, the parable of the sower. Now we discussed parables generally, and also this parable to a degree in Mark chapter 4, the last time it popped up. So I'd invite you to check out that video. I've linked it below in the description, so you can find it there if you'd like a refresher. It's tricky to interpret parables. We need to do it very carefully because no parable is a perfect allegory. That's not what they're designed to be. And so frequently it's tempting for us to say here, well, the sower is God. The seeds are the word, and the soil are people in whom the word is sown. And I think that Jesus does a good job at breaking down some of the basic ideas of his parable, but I think we just have to be very careful when we interpret parables. For example, this parable isn't encouraging us to go out and to be farmers and to waste seeds. And yet, if you were doing a quick reading of the parable, you might be able to make an argument for that. But that's not what this is about. It is showing us how lavish, how extravagant God is, even with those who reject him. I wonder how your soil looks if you consider soils in this parable the state of the heart. Now, in the second portion of this chapter, from about verse 22 to verse 56, there are three miracles that are placed back to back to back, with the third miracle being a double feature. Keep this format in mind. It's going to pop up again in a powerful way in Luke chapter 15. First, Jesus shows his lordship over nature with the first miracle. The sea at this time in the ancient Near East was a symbol of chaos. It was unpredictable and untamable. That's why the disciples were stunned that Jesus could command even the wind and the waves. It was something that just was not done. Second, Jesus shows his lordship over spirits. So we've got lordship over nature, over the physical, and then Jesus shows his lordship over spirits, the spiritual realm. By sending the demons from the man into the pigs, he's doing two things. He's indicating that human well-being is more important than the well-being of capital or the well-being of livestock. And I think that's an important note for us to glom onto in these days where we're trying to figure out what to do during a pandemic. Secondly, Jesus named himself as a kosher Jew despite his seeming disregard for Sabbath. By casting the demons into the pigs, he's making an implicit statement that this is where the demons belong, is in pigs, which were not kosher, if you'll remember. Finally, so Jesus has shown his lordship over nature, over the physical, over the spirits, over the spiritual, and finally, Jesus shows his lordship over death and hopelessness of any kind, both of which share many similarities. See, hopelessness is the death of hope, and if your hope dies, then you may as well be dead. So he resurrects the hope of an unclean woman who touched him. This was extremely taboo, not only for a woman to touch a man in public, but also for this woman to come up and touch the rabbi. This was just not done. Plus, she was unclean. And then he resurrects a 12-year-old girl. Jesus is Lord of all. He's Lord of nature, he's Lord of the spiritual realm, and he's Lord of everything, even death, even our hope. And especially when the situation seems hopeless, he's Lord of all. I wonder, where do you need Jesus to show his lordship in your life this week? That's all for Luke chapter 8. Tomorrow, on the 24th of April, we'll be looking at Luke chapter 9. May God bless you in your reading of Scripture.